The HOA demolished my lake cabin to build a hotel, but they had no idea who they were really messing with. They rolled in with bulldozers and flattened the one place my wife asked me to rebuild before she died. Her ashes were buried right there. The HOA president just smiled, waving some fake paperwork, while her crew turned my life into rubble. She thought she was fighting some quiet old man. What she didn't realize is that my whole family are federal agents, and while she was planning her little resort, my kids were about to uncover the massive crime she'd been hiding for years. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you have to see this. And if you believe that no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit that subscribe button, because you don't want to miss seeing this family serve up some federal-grade justice. The first thing I heard wasn't the crash, but the deep, gut-rumbling growl of a diesel engine where no engine should be. It was just after sunrise, the air still cool and smelling of pine and damp earth. I was on my porch with a cup of coffee, the steam fogging my glasses. Then came the splintering sound. A sound I knew all too well from my years in the Seabees, the sound of good wood giving way to brute force. I put the mug down, a cold dread washing over me, and walked toward the tree line that separated my house from the little cabin down by the lake. And then I saw it. A yellow bulldozer, its massive blade already halfway through the front wall of the cabin. My cabin. Sarah's cabin. Two people in crisp polo shirts with the HOA logo stood off to the side, one holding a clipboard, the other filming the destruction with their phone, a smug little smile playing on their lips. I started running. It was a clumsy old man run, my knees screaming in protest. But I didn't care. I could see the stone fireplace, the one I'd built by hand, with river rocks we'd pulled from the lake, teetering as the machine pushed forward. I was yelling, but the words were lost in the roar of the engine. When I finally got close enough, a woman stepped in my path. Catherine Malloy, the HOA chairwoman. She held up her hand like a traffic cop, her face a perfect mask of condescending pity. "Mr. Riker, please don't make this any more difficult than it has to be," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. Behind her, with a final, sickening groan, the roof collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and splinters into the morning air. The fireplace, the last thing standing, crumbled into a pile of stone and soot. My legs almost gave out. Sarah's ashes were in an urn, mortared into the base of that hearth. It was her wish. "This is our forever spot, Tom," she'd said, her voice thin but her eyes bright. "Right here, where we can watch the sun come up over the water." I looked from the rubble to Malloy's perfectly calm face. "What are you doing?" I managed to get out, my voice raspy. "This isn't your land anymore, Mr. Riker," she said, gesturing vaguely at the wreckage with her pen. "It's been rezoned for community use." She handed the clipboard to her assistant and patted my arm. It took every ounce of my self-control not to pull away. The cabin was a non-conforming structure, a violation of the revised bylaws. We sent a notice. I never got a notice. I checked my mail every day. I lived for the mail, for the catalogs and the junk flyers, for anything to break the silence of the house. I would have known. She explained it all in that infuriatingly patient tone people use on children and the elderly. The HOA had quietly acquired the lakefront parcels through something called a private land trust. A shell corporation, I'd later learn. They pushed through a new zoning clause in an emergency meeting nobody was told about. My cabin, the one my grandfather built and I had spent 2 years restoring after Sarah got sick, was suddenly an eyesore that had to go. It was my promise to her. The cancer took her piece by piece, but she never lost her fire. "Don't you dare just sit in that big empty house, Tom," she'd ordered me from her hospice bed. "You go finish our cabin. I want to know it's there. For you." And I did. I replaced every rotten board, reglazed every window, laid every single stone of that fireplace myself. It was my church, my therapy. It was the last piece of her I had left to hold on to. Now, it was a pile of garbage. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, so profound I thought I might just fall over right there on the muddy ground. I ignored Malloy and walked numbly toward the ruins. I just needed to find the urn, to get her out of there. But one of Malloy's hired goons, a guy in a cheap security uniform, stepped in front of me. "Sir, this is an active demolition site," he said flatly. "For your safety, you need to stay back." My only hope was the appeal process. They couldn't just do this. There had to be rules, laws they had to follow. I spent the next 2 days at the county records office, my hands shaking so bad I could barely read the deeds. I filed the appeal, paid the fee, and waited. A week later, a sterile white envelope arrived from the HOA. A hearing was scheduled. My one chance. I put on my only suit, the one from Sarah's funeral, and drove to the community center. I walked into the conference room at the exact time listed on the letter. It was empty. A woman at a reception desk looked up from her phone, annoyed that I'd interrupted her. "Can I help you?" she asked. I showed her the letter. "I'm here for the Riker property review." She glanced at the paper and then back at her computer screen, typing with 2 fingers. "Oh," she said with a shrug. "That vote was held 2 weeks ago. The appeal was denied." My blood ran cold. "But the letter says today." She sighed, a long put-upon breath. "That's just a formality letter, sir. We send it after the decision is made." She wouldn't look at me. It was a setup. The whole thing was a lie. As I stood there, speechless, Catherine Malloy walked out of an office down the hall. She was laughing on the phone with someone. She saw me, ended her call, and walked over. That same pitying smile on her face. "You missed your chance, Mr. Riker," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She leaned in a little closer, her perfume making me sick. "But I think you'll love what my cousin is planning for the space. A lovely boutique hotel. It's going to do wonders for property values." Her cousin. The whole thing was a land grab for her family. They hadn't just torn down my cabin, they had spit on my wife's grave for a payday. I walked out of that building and drove back to the lake. The debris was gone. The lot was scraped clean, not even a splinter left. All that remained was a raw, muddy scar on the earth where our life used to be. The neighbors I'd known for 20 years wouldn't meet my eye. I saw curtains twitch, doors close. They were all terrified of her. And in that moment, standing on the empty patch of dirt that held the last of my wife, I felt a kind of despair I hadn't known since the day I lost her. I didn't just lose the cabin. I lost her all over again. For 3 days, the silence in my house was louder than any bulldozer. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like her footsteps. I'd find myself walking to the window that looked out toward the lake, expecting to see the glint of the sun on the cabin roof, and my gut would clench all over again when I saw nothing but mud. I'm not a man who breaks easily. The Navy taught me how to take a hit, how to compartmentalize, how to rebuild. But this was different. This wasn't a structure failing. It was a promise broken. I found myself in my workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil usually a comfort, now just a reminder of the work I could no longer do. I picked up an old hand plane, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. It was Sarah's favorite. She used to say the sound of it shaving a pine board was like a whisper, and that's when I remembered. It was about 10 years ago, not long after Malloy first got elected to the board. Sarah had gone to a meeting to complain about a new rule, something petty about the color of mailboxes. She came home pale and quiet. She told me Malloy had pulled her aside afterward, gotten right in her face, and told her that people who cause trouble find trouble. Sarah said there was something in her eyes, something cold and dead. I'd told her to let it go. She's just a busybody with a clipboard, honey. She's not worth our time. Sarah had looked at me, a deep disappointment in her eyes that I didn't understand then. "No, Tom," she'd said. "She's a bully. And bullies don't stop until someone makes them." I'd dismissed it. I'd told her we had better things to worry about. Now, standing in the silence, her words echoed in my head. I hadn't listened. And because I didn't, a bully with a clipboard had desecrated her grave. That night, I picked up the phone. It was the hardest thing I'd done all week. Rikers don't ask for help. We're the ones people call. We fix things, we serve. But I wasn't calling for help. I was calling for a muster. My daughter Maya answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional even after hours. "Everything okay, Dad?" I cleared my throat. "Just wanted to have a family dinner. Sunday. My house." A pause on her end. "We hadn't had a proper family dinner, all of us together, since we'd buried her mother." "I'll be there," she said. No more questions asked. One call to my son Leo, who was probably halfway through disarming something that could level a city block. He just said, "See you Sunday, Pop." A text to my younger brother Robert, who was supposed to be enjoying his retirement from the Secret Service by playing bad golf in Florida. He replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. Last, a call to my nephew Kevin, Robert's boy, the quiet genius who did something with computers for the Department of Justice that I never fully understood. He agreed immediately. I didn't tell them why. I didn't have to. They knew. Sunday came, and they filled the house with a life it hadn't had in years. Maya, my FBI agent, stood by the window, observing everything, her mind always working, piecing together patterns no one else could see. Leo, ATF bomb squad, couldn't sit still, pacing the living room, his energy a coiled spring. He sees the world in terms of pressure points and trigger mechanisms. My brother Robert sat in my armchair like he owned it, his calm demeanor a lifetime of watching presidents and assessing threats. And his son Kevin sat on the couch, laptop open but ignored, his fingers tracing patterns on the keyboard, listening. I cooked Sarah's recipe for pot roast. We ate in near silence at the big dining table, the empty chair at the head of it a physical presence. After we finished, I pushed my plate away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just told them the story start to finish. I told them about the bulldozer, the smirking HOA reps, and Malloy's condescending tone. I told them about the fake meeting, the empty room, and the reveal about her cousin's hotel. And then I told them about the fireplace and the urn. I watched their faces as I spoke. Maya's jaw was set so tight, a muscle jumped in her cheek. Leo had his hands balled into fists on the table, his knuckles white. Robert's eyes, usually warm and tired, had gone flat and cold, the look he got when he was on duty. Kevin had stopped moving his fingers and was just staring at me, his expression unreadable but intense. When I finished, the silence came back, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of a cold, calculating anger. It was Maya who broke it. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the room. She knew Mom's ashes were there. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a charge. Leo pushed his chair back from the table, the legs scraping harshly against the wood floor. "This is not a zoning dispute," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is an attack." Robert leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He looked at me, and I saw the same regret I felt. "Sarah tried to warn us about her," he said. "We told her to drop it. We told her it wasn't a fight worth picking." He shook his head slowly. "We were wrong." He looked around the table at his son, at my daughter, professionals, agents, public servants. He looked back at me. "You didn't just pick a fight with some old CB, ma'am," he said, speaking as if Malloy were in the room. "You picked a fight with the wrong family." Maya nodded, a flicker of fire in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a recruit at Quantico. "They don't get away with this, Dad," she said, her voice like steel. "Not this time." A switch had been flipped. Grief had burned away, leaving something hard and sharp in its place. Leo walked over to the sideboard and grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Kevin finally opened his laptop and started typing, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. The dinner was over. The planning had begun. My brother looked at all of us, a grim smile on his face. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work." Operation Family Firebreak is now in effect. It started subtly, like a slow poison. I got the first letter a week after the family dinner. It was a crisp, white envelope with the HOA's logo, and inside was a notice of violation. The fine was for $50. The reason? Excessive noise during community quiet hours. I had been in my workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, using a handsaw to reclaim some old oak timber from a neighbor's discarded fence. A handsaw. The only sound it made was a gentle shush shush, a sound I find more calming than a church hymn. The letter was signed by Catherine Malloy. It was a message, not a fine. A message. I'm watching you. 2 days later, another one arrived. This time, $100 for improper storage of construction materials. The pile of reclaimed oak was stacked neatly against the side of my garage, 100 feet from the road, invisible to everyone except someone trespassing on my property to look for it. They were trying to bleed me, to needle me with petty paperwork until I gave up. But every fine they sent was a fresh log on a fire they didn't realize was burning. I paid them without comment. Let her think it was working. The real line was crossed the following Saturday. Maya had brought her 2 kids over, my grandkids, a boy and a girl full of more energy than a struck match. They were playing in the backyard. Their laughter, the first real joy I'd felt in that house for weeks. I was watching them from the kitchen window when I saw him. A man I didn't recognize, standing just inside my property line, half hidden by a pine tree. He was holding up a phone, pointing it right at the kids. I was out the back door before I even thought about it. I'm not a young man, but I covered that 50 yards of lawn faster than I had in 30 years. What do you think you're doing? I yelled, my voice a low growl. He flinched, surprised. He was a weaselly guy in a golf shirt 2 sizes too small. He held up a clipboard like a shield. Community property inspection. He stammered. We're documenting potential covenant violations. He was photographing my grandkids and calling it a property inspection. My hand instinctively went to the hammer, looped on my work belt. For a split second, I saw what it would look like to just keep walking. He must have seen it in my eyes, because he took a step back, then another, before turning and scrambling off my lawn like a scared rabbit. That night, I installed 3 new trail cams in the trees lining my property, the kind hunters use. Silent, motion-activated, and with night vision. The next morning, my neighbor Eli Jensen came over. Eli's a retired lineman, a good man with a bad back and hands like worn leather. He'd seen the whole thing with the inspector from his own window. He didn't say much, just showed up with his toolbox and a couple of steel fence posts. Figured you could use a better property line, he grunted. We spent the day together, sinking the posts in concrete, a quiet act of defiance. By evening, another notice was taped to my door, and one on Eli's, $200 each for an unapproved structural addition. Eli just crumpled it up. Let 'em send it, he said, spitting on the ground. They can't get blood from a stone. But I knew better. I'd seen it happen. They'd fine you, then add late fees, then legal fees, until the fines were bigger than your mortgage. Then, they'd put a lien on your house. The whole neighborhood was walking on eggshells. Heads would duck down when Malloy's car drove by. Conversations would stop. A few mailboxes on our street got smashed one night. Nothing was ever proven, but we all knew. That's when the private security car started making its rounds. A white sedan with a cheap-looking magnetic logo on the door. Driving it was a guy named Randy Kincaid, a local nobody who always wanted to be a cop but couldn't pass the psych exam. He wore a tactical vest over his polo shirt and called himself the Chief of Enforcement. He'd park across from my house for hours, just staring. One night, the power to my workshop went out. The main breaker hadn't tripped. I went outside with a flashlight and checked the external generator I kept for backup. The main fuel line had been neatly sliced, the shutoff valve jammed open. Diesel was soaking into the ground. It was an amateur move, but a dangerous one. They were escalating. I fixed the line, cleaned up the spill, and then I went to check my new trail cam. And there it was. Crystal clear, time-stamped footage of Randy Kincaid, our brave chief of enforcement, kneeling by the generator with a pair of pliers in his hand. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't file a complaint with the HOA. I saved the video file, encrypted it, and sent it to Leo. He didn't text back with questions. He just handled it. A week later, an inspector from the state's Environmental Protection Agency showed up at Malloy's office with a quiet warning about illegal fuel spills and federal fines. Randy's patrols stopped a day later. It was a small win, a tiny pushback, but it was a start. While they were busy playing their stupid harassment games, I was in my workshop. I wasn't just fixing things anymore. I was drawing new plans for the cabin, down to the last nail and screw. Not because I was ready to rebuild, but because the plans were the first step to proving the demolition was illegal. The old cabin had been built to code, a fact I could prove. Late one night, Maya called. Her voice was hushed, excited. "Dad, I've been digging into the land trust sale," she said. "I found something. The paperwork. It doesn't add up." The flicker of hope from Maya's call was extinguished less than a week later. It happened to the Millers, a young family 3 houses down, with a toddler and another on the way. The notice was nailed to their front door. Foreclosure. The HOA had put a lien on their house for an accumulation of fines, unpaid fees for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, for their grass being a 1/4 inch too high, for a fence that wasn't the pre-approved shade of beige. They were making an example of them. I watched from my window as they packed their lives into cardboard boxes. A silent, grim procession. No one helped. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were afraid. Helping a pariah made you a pariah. That night, a certified letter was delivered to Eli. It wasn't a fine. It was a civil complaint. The HOA was suing him for damages to community aesthetics and willful disregard for established covenants for helping me put up a fence. It was a stack of paper an inch thick, full of legal words designed to intimidate and confuse. Eli brought it over, his face pale under his porch light. He just held it out to me. "I can't afford this, Tom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My pension, it's all I got." I felt a cold knot of guilt in my stomach. They were coming for him because he stood with me. They were isolating me, cutting me off from anyone who might offer a hand. That night, I called Maya. I was pacing my kitchen, the legal papers spread out on the table under the harsh overhead light. "They're suing Eli," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "They're foreclosing on the Millers. We have to do something now." I could hear her sigh on the other end of the line, the sound of a professional trying to manage an emotional civilian. And that civilian was her father. "Dad, you need to stop," she said, her voice firm. "Stop antagonizing them. Pay the fines, take down the fence posts. Just be quiet for a little while." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Be quiet? Maya, they bulldozed your mother's cabin. They're ruining lives." "There is no be quiet. You don't understand what we're looking at," she insisted, her voice dropping lower. "This isn't just about bylaws and fines anymore. The money from these foreclosures, the kickbacks from the vendors they force on people, we think they're laundering bribes. This is bigger than the HOA. We need time to build a case that sticks. If you go off half-cocked, you'll scare them underground, and we'll lose them." Something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed dam of patience and strategy I'd been building for weeks just crumbled into dust. "A case? You think this is a case?" I was shouting into the phone now, my voice raw. "I'm not interested in your investigation. I'm not one of your assets in the field. This is not some file on your desk you get to close. This is my wife's grave you're talking about." There was a sharp, stunned silence on the other end. I had never, not once in her entire life, raised my voice to my daughter like that. I didn't wait for her to reply. I slammed the old landline phone back into its cradle so hard the plastic cracked. The house was suddenly suffocating. I grabbed my keys and got in my truck. I didn't know where I was going. But my hands knew the way. I ended up parked at the edge of the access road, looking down at the empty plot of land by the lake. It was worse at night. The moon made the churned-up mud look like a fresh wound. I got out and walked toward it, needing to be there, needing to feel the loss. And that's when I saw it. Hammered into the big oak tree that used to shade the cabin's porch was a large, professionally printed sign. Bright, white, with stark black letters. No trespassing. Property of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. Violators will be prosecuted. It was a final, brutal insult. A stake through the heart. But it wasn't the worst of it. At the base of the tree, there had been a small, bronze memorial plaque my kids and I had put there after Sarah died. It was simple, just her name, and the years of her life. Someone had taken a tool, a screwdriver or a rock, and had violently scratched her name off it. Gouges of raw metal gleamed in the moonlight where her name used to be. They hadn't just taken the land. They were trying to erase her completely. That was it. I was done. The fight went out of me, replaced by a vast, crushing emptiness. They'd won. A tired old man and his broken promise were no match for their kind of malice. I turned to walk back to my truck, ready to go home, lock the doors, and just stop. Then, headlights swept across the clearing. A familiar truck, its old engine rumbling, pulled up behind mine. It was Eli. He got out and walked over, not saying a word, and just stood beside me, looking at the sign, then at the defaced plaque. He looked at me, at the dead look in my eyes. He nodded slowly, then turned and looked toward the back of his truck. He turned back to me, his gaze steady. "You still got that hammer?" he asked, his voice rough. A spark caught somewhere deep inside me. We walked back to my truck. I pulled the framing hammer from my tool belt. We didn't tear down their sign. We did something better. I grabbed one of the new fence posts from the truck bed. Together, we dug a new hole, right next to their sign, a few feet closer to the water, on land I knew for a fact was still mine. We set the post in the earth, solid and true. And as Eli packed the dirt around its base, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small magnetic device. It was no bigger than a quarter. I pressed it firmly to the inside of the hollow steel post, where no one would ever see it. A high-fidelity, long-range microphone. My son Leo had given it to me. "Just in case," he'd said. The week that followed was the quietest kind of war. I went about my days, mending a fence here, reorganizing my workshop there. On the surface, I was just an old man keeping busy. But every evening, I'd sit in my study and listen. The microphone Eli and I planted was astonishingly clear. Mostly, it picked up the wind, the distant sound of cars, the lapping of the lake. But then, there were conversations. Malloy meeting with her cousin Donnie, the hotel developer. Their voices were little more than whispers on the wind, but the mic picked them up. They talked about permits, kickbacks, and timelines. They laughed about how easy it was to clear the way. Every word was a nail in her coffin, recorded and uploaded to a secure server Kevin had set up. I felt like a sniper, lying in wait, perfectly still, my breathing slow and even, waiting for the signal to take the shot. I was doing exactly what Maya had asked. I was being quiet, but I wasn't backing down. I was reloading. The signal came in 3 parts. A rapid-fire succession of calls that changed everything. The first was from Maya. It was a Tuesday night, late. She didn't bother with hello. Dad, they never owned it. Her voice was tight with the thrill of discovery. The HOA never legally owned the lake. The land trust that supposedly bought the parcels? It was a ghost. It never had any assets. The transfer paperwork they used to seize your plot was a complete fabrication. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. It was one thing to suspect it, another to have an FBI agent confirm it. The second call came an hour later. It was Kevin. "Uncle Tom," he said, and I could hear the clicking of his keyboard. "I'm in. I'm inside the Shell Corp's digital back end. The notary stamp on the deed transfer? It's fake. The notary public, a Cynthia Webb from Nevada, doesn't exist. But you know who does exist? Catherine Malloy's sister. A Cynthia Malloy lives in Reno. She's not a notary. She's a receptionist at a dental office. My mind reeled. It was sloppy, arrogant. They never thought anyone would look this closely. The final call came just before dawn from my brother, Robert. His voice was gravelly, the sound of a man who'd just pulled an all-nighter, calling in favors. "Tom," he said, "I showed the file to a friend of mine. A guy I used to work with who now runs a federal real estate fraud unit. He's very interested." A quiet warrant had been filed. They were moving, but the feds move at their own speed. I had to make the first move on my own terms. The next morning, I didn't go to my workshop. I put on my suit again, the funeral suit. But this time it felt different. It felt like armor. In my hand, I held a single document, a legal filing prepared with language so precise and deadly, it was like a shaped charge. It wasn't an appeal to get the cabin back. That fight was for later. This was something else entirely. In my research at the county office, buried deep in the state statutes, I'd found a clause nobody had used in 50 years. A Veteran Land Protections Act, passed after the Korean War, to stop developers from preying on returning soldiers. It contained a provision allowing a veteran to file an emergency injunction against any entity that used fraudulent means to seize property, especially if that fraud involved the misuse of federal funds. And that was the key. Kevin hadn't just found the fake notary. He'd followed the money. The seed money for the community hotel project wasn't from a private investor. It was from a federal small business relief fund. Money meant to keep restaurants and shops afloat during the pandemic. Malloy had routed it through 2 other shell companies before it landed in the HOA's master account. Fraud, tax evasion, and misuse of federal relief funds. That was the kill shot. I walked into the county courthouse, bypassed the local clerks, and went straight to the federal annex. I filed the emergency injunction not to reclaim my land, but to seize the HOA's master account. All of it. The fines they'd collected, the fees they'd extorted, and every last cent of that federal relief money. I was cutting off their oxygen. The effect was immediate. 2 days later, a notice went up on the community center door. Due to a pending federal review, all HOA accounts have been temporarily frozen. The news spread through the neighborhood like a wildfire. It was working. Catherine Malloy did not take it well. She got wind of my name on the injunction filing and she panicked. The first sign was a letter that arrived by courier. It was from a high-priced law firm in the city, full of threats about tortious interference and defamation. I used it as a coaster. The second sign was a call from a reporter at the local paper, a young woman, her voice full of an almost gleeful seriousness. "Mr. Riker, I'm calling about allegations made by Catherine Malloy. She claims you've been leading a campaign of harassment against her, culminating in elder abuse and filing a frivolous lawsuit that threatens to bankrupt our community." I almost laughed. Elder abuse? She was accusing me of abusing her. She was trying to flip the script, to paint herself as the victim, and me as the angry old man, terrorizing a poor, defenseless woman. She was taking the fight public. Good, that's exactly where I wanted it. Let her stand in the light. Let everyone see what she really was. The phone calls from worried neighbors started, but I let them go to voicemail. There was only one call that mattered. It was the one notifying me that the HOA had called an emergency town hall meeting to address the financial crisis I had caused. That was the arena. That was where this would end. The community center hall was packed, smelling of stale coffee and simmering resentment. Every folding chair was taken, and people were lined up against the walls. The air was thick with tension, a low hum of anxious whispers filling the room under the buzzing fluorescent lights. A local kid with a wobbly tripod was live streaming the whole thing from his phone. I saw the Millers, the young couple who'd lost their home, standing in the back, their faces tired but their eyes fixed on the front of the room. I saw Eli, who gave me a slow, deliberate nod. I sat in the second row, a single manila folder resting on my knees. I was calm. My part was just to present the facts. The work was already done. Catherine Malloy swept in a few minutes late, flanked by the rest of the board and a slick-looking lawyer in an expensive suit. She took her place at the head table, arranged her microphone, and surveyed the room with an expression of pained authority, as if she were a benevolent queen forced to address her unruly subjects. She started the meeting by tapping the microphone twice, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the murmuring. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "I know there has been a great deal of concern and misinformation circulating in our community." Her eyes found me in the crowd. "As you know, our HOA's operational accounts have been frozen due to a malicious and frivolous legal action filed by one of our own residents, Mr. Tom Riker." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. She held up a hand for silence. "This action, based on unfounded accusations, threatens the very stability of our community. It jeopardizes our maintenance contracts, our insurance, and our shared property values." She was good. She was framing me as the enemy, the one destroying the community, while she was its noble protector. She went on for another 10 minutes, a masterful performance of lies and half-truths, painting herself as the victim of a personal vendetta. When she finished, she said, "The board will now take questions." Before anyone else could speak, I stood up. I didn't have a question. "My name is Tom Riker," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the quiet room. "I'd like to make a statement." Malloy's lawyer started to stand, to object, but she waved him down, a smirk on her face. She thought she could handle me. "Mr. Riker," she said, dripping with condescension, "you have 30 seconds. That was more than enough time." I walked to the front of the room, opened my folder, and placed my phone on the lectern. "A few weeks ago," I said, looking out at my neighbors, "a conversation was recorded near the lake." I pressed play, and out of the cheap speaker clear as day came Catherine Malloy's voice, talking to her cousin Donnie. "It's a gold mine, Donnie. I just need to get rid of that old shack, and the view is perfect. I've always said this place just needs a nice little spa retreat, a place for us to unwind." A collective gasp went through the room. Malloy's face went from pale to a deep mottled red. That's taken out of context. That recording is illegal," she sputtered. I ignored her. "Then there's the matter of the land itself," I continued, turning to the projector screen behind her. I clicked a button on my phone, and a document appeared on the screen for everyone to see. It was a copy of the deed transfer. "This is the document the HOA used to claim my property. It was notarized by a Cynthia Webb in Nevada." I clicked again. A new image appeared, a screenshot of the Nevada State Notary Public Database. Funny thing is, there is no licensed notary in the entire state of Nevada named Cynthia Webb. A louder wave of murmurs. "However," I said, clicking one more time, "there is a Cynthia Malloy who lives in Reno, Catherine's sister." I looked directly at Malloy. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Her lawyer was staring at the screen, and I saw him visibly flinch. He knew. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping, "there's the matter of what happened to the cabin after you illegally demolished it." I nodded to the back of the room. Leo, who had slipped in unnoticed, gave me a subtle thumbs up. An image flashed on the screen, a stunningly clear aerial shot taken from a drone. It showed the protected wetland at the far end of the lake, a place where development was strictly forbidden, and dumped in the middle of it, half hidden by reeds, was a mountain of debris. Splintered wood, broken glass, and the unmistakable river stones from a fireplace I had built with my own 2 hands. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting. Malloy was banging the gavel, screaming for order, but no one was listening. And then, everything went quiet. A man was walking down the center aisle. He wore a simple gray suit and had an air of calm, unshakable authority. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked directly to the head table, where Catherine Malloy was still standing, her face a mask of fury and confusion. The man held out a folded document. "Catherine Malloy?" he asked, his voice professional and devoid of emotion. He was speaking directly into her still-live microphone. "I'm Investigator David Chen with the state's Financial Crimes Division. You are being served." The silence was broken by a single, sharp cheer from the back. Then another. Then the entire room was on its feet, roaring. It wasn't just cheering. It was a dam of years of frustration and fear breaking all at once. People were shouting about their own fines, their own threats, their own bullied silence. Eli stood on a chair, his face beaming. "We're done being afraid of you, Catherine," he yelled, and the roar grew louder. Someone from the back of the room, a woman I didn't even know, made a motion. I moved to remove Catherine Malloy as chair, effective immediately. The ayes were a deafening shout. A second motion was called. I moved to dissolve the entire HOA board, pending the results of the criminal investigation. The room shook with the vote. It was over. Her power, built on whispers and intimidation, had evaporated under the harsh glare of a projector screen and a single, quiet man in a gray suit. The aftermath of the town hall was strangely quiet. The explosion of relief and anger in that room gave way to an uneasy calm, like the air after a tornado passes through. My phone rang for 2 days straight. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years called to thank me, to apologize for their silence, to tell me their own stories of Malloy's quiet tyranny. The Millers called to say that an emergency fund, organized by the newly formed community council, was helping them halt the foreclosure. It felt good, but I knew it wasn't over. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and Catherine Malloy had just been backed into the tightest corner of her life. The warrants were sealed, and the investigation was federal, which meant it was slow. She was out on her own recognizance, a woman with nothing left to lose. I made sure the trail cams had fresh batteries and went back to my routine. The alert on my phone went off just after 2 in the morning. A motion trigger from the camera I had aimed at my workshop door. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. On my phone screen, under the ghostly green glow of the night vision, a figure was hunched over the door's deadbolt. They had a crowbar. It was her, Catherine Malloy, her hair a mess, her face contorted in a frantic, ugly snarl. She was trying to break into my workshop. I guess in her scrambled, panicked mind, that's where I kept my secrets. The plans, the recordings, the evidence. She probably imagined a big corkboard with red string connecting pictures, like in the movies. She thought if she could just destroy the proof, she could somehow undo it all. I didn't move. I didn't grab a weapon. I just lay there in the dark and watched her on the screen. She finally got the door to splinter and pop open, slipping inside. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. "There's a break-in in progress at my residence," I said, my voice as calm as if I were ordering a pizza. I gave them the address and a description of the suspect. "She is unarmed but unstable. She's inside my detached garage." 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up the driveway 5 minutes later, their lights off. They were quiet, professional. I watched on the camera as they took positions on either side of the workshop door. One of them called out her name. "Catherine Malloy. This is the sheriff's department. Come out with your hands up." There was a crash from inside, the sound of metal shelves being overturned. Then she stumbled out, clutching a handful of my old schematics for a sprinkler system, holding them up like they were the key to everything. When she saw the deputies, she shrieked, a raw, unhinged sound. "He's the criminal!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my darkened house. "He set me up. The evidence is in there." They told her to put her hands behind her back. She refused. She swung at one of the deputies, her nails scratching his forearm. It was a pathetic, clumsy move, and it was the last mistake she'd get to make. They took her to the ground, fast and hard, and the fight was over. The sound of her wailing as they put her in the back of the car was the last I ever heard of her voice. Breaking and entering was bad enough. But assaulting a police officer during the commission of a felony? She had just gift-wrapped the case for the prosecution. The final blow came not with a bang, but with a press release. A week later, the local FBI field office issued a statement. It was short, dry, and devastating. Catherine Malloy, her cousin Donnie Voss, and 2 other board members were charged with a litany of federal crimes: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, and violations of the Clean Water Act for dumping the demolition debris. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the new felony charges, she didn't even try to fight. She pled out, taking a deal that would send her to federal prison for a very long time. With the criminal case settled, I filed my civil suit. It was an open and shut case. A federal judge awarded me full restitution for the cabin, plus punitive damages threefold under the Veteran Land Protections Act. The money didn't matter, but the judgment did. It was a legal declaration that we were right. At the next community meeting, there was only one item on the agenda. By a unanimous vote, the Lakeview Homeowners Association was permanently and legally abolished. The seized HOA funds were used to create a new entity, the Lakeview Veteran Conservation Trust. And my neighbors voted me in as the first trustee. That spring, the trucks started arriving at the empty lot by the lake. This time, they weren't bulldozers, they were lumber trucks, cement mixers, and the dusty pickups of my neighbors. Eli was there every single day, his bad back forgotten. The Miller family came on weekends, their toddler handing me nails one by one. People brought over food, drinks, and helping hands. We didn't just rebuild the cabin, we built it better. Stronger foundation, better wood, bigger windows to look out over the water. It took us the whole summer. On the day we finished, Maya, Leo, and their families came over. The house was filled with the smell of fresh-cut pine and sawdust, the sounds of my grandkids laughing. After everyone had gone home and the sun was setting over the lake, I walked over to the new fireplace. The stones were different, but the hearth was in the same spot. I reached into a box and pulled out a new bronze plaque, polished and shining. I set it gently on the center of the wooden mantel. It was simple, just like the old one, with her name and her years. And underneath, I'd had them add 4 small words. I ran my thumb over the engraved letters. A promise made across time and grief, finally kept. It said, "We kept our promise."